Our closing keynote speaker is here, Dr. Genevra Walters. Hey, Genevra, I don't know you, but I'm happy. I can't wait to see and she's the superintendent of, do I say it right, Kankakee?
Yes, you said it correct. Yeah.
Ooh, see, I have Kankakee. Thank you, Lord. Kankakee School District in Kankakee, Illinois. Her vision is to develop an educational system that creates opportunities for all children to be valued, contributing citizens in a fast-changing global society. She is committed to the growing and development of lifelong learners. Dr. Walters attended the University of Illinois at Chicago for both her bachelor's and her master's degree in social work. She completed an educational doctorate at Illinois State University. Dr. Walters began her professional career as a school social worker in Kankakee School District 111. Dr. Walters is the co-author of the book, What Works for Special Education and At-Risk Learners, a framework for general education teachers and administrators. The book provides a framework and initiatives that can be used to increase the quality of education for all students. The strategies in the book can be used in the school's environment, regardless of abilities or disabilities. Dr. Walters returned back home to Kankakee School District 111 as a superintendent on May 30th, 2014. And that means you've been there a while. That's a long tenure because it's 3 years. So you've been doing some amazing work. We are super excited to have you here, and I'm going to share my screen with you, stop sharing my screen just in case you need to share your screen for a PowerPoint. We're going to close this out. It's been a powerful, packed day, and we still have just a little bit more. Dr. Walters gives us our last dessert of the day.
All right, good morning, everyone. Actually, it's almost afternoon. My goal today is to really discuss the why of project-based learning and how important it is for career exploration and experiences, particularly for students that are at risk for whatever reason, whether they're living in poverty, whether or not they're living in an area where they're disenfranchised for whatever reason. I really do feel strongly that project-based learning is the beginning of creating equity in our public education system. So just a little bit about Kankakee. And I did see somebody, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, Kevin Schouten says he lives in Kankakee. A shout out to Kevin, because I saw that in the chat. Kankakee is a school district that has always been highly diverse. I grew up in Kankakee, attended Kankakee School District 111. And one of the things that I love about Kankakee is the diversity. Currently, we're approximately 47.4% African-American, 31.4% Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx. And I use all of those labels because it is really important to me to let the people in the community decide what label they prefer. 17.7% white or Caucasian American, 5.4% Asian, and then 4.1% mixed race. And the other thing that's really important is we're 85.3% low income. So what's important to know in my mind in the educational system is that we cannot continue, and this is nationally, internationally, locally, or statewide, we cannot expect economic growth when we undereducate a large number of our future citizens. And so the traditional system was designed for a certain group of families and a certain group of children, very traditional two-parent homes. It was really developed on middle-class values. If we continue to perpetuate that system and leave a large number of our students behind or undereducated, our economy will not flourish. When I was hired in Kankakee, one of the main expectations was that I changed what was happening at the high school level, particularly our graduation rate, because our local employers truly believed that our graduation rate, along with 2 other schools in our county, was negatively impacting the growth of our economy. And I agreed with it. Although there are some educators that were offended by that, I do think that there's a direct correlation between the quality of education, the ability for the majority of the students to reach mastery, and to be prepared for future employment. And so it is important to me, starting as early as kindergarten, to start to replicate what naturally happens in most middle-class families, where you're playing school, you're pretending to be a police officer, the children are pretending to be a doctor. That is the beginning of career exploration. And when it's not happening with children and they're in high school for the first time trying to figure out what they want to do when they grow up, it's very difficult to navigate future employment when you don't start thinking about it till your junior or senior year. And so the first thing that I wanted to do to help our children start to think about careers as early as possible is to implement some kind of a career exploration and exposure as early as kindergarten. And defined at the time, STEM was the name of the company. Defined STEM at that time, now Defined Learning, actually partnered with us to make sure that that could happen. And this is the framework that we created in 2014. We wanted our students that were young, kindergarten students, to really start thinking about those human services fields, because those are the fields or the jobs that are right there. Most students understand human services, all the way up to 5th grade, when they start to explore the more technical fields, skilled and technical science, architecture, construction, science. So going from the right there fields, human services, to the more technical fields with just exposure. Our goal was that by the 6th grade, students would actually take a survey to figure out what fields were they most interested in based on a career exploration survey. From 6th grade through 12th grade, students were going to start to hone in on those fields that they've already identified as the fields that they're most interested in. Defined Learning helped us to make that real for the students in the classroom and connect it to the academic skills that they needed to learn, so that you knew, what reading skills, what math skills, what social studies or science skills do you need to master in order to go into a particular field. For example, skilled and technical science, you need more math and science. Human services, you need more social services and more of the soft skills. So that was the goal, to prepare students over time.
My name is Genevra Walters, and I'm the Superintendent of Kankakee School District 111. I think that a lot of people across the nation, they feel that schools are failing, but they're really, what schools are failing to do is prepare students for the jobs that exist today. But if you think about when schools when public schools first started, it was actually very innovative. This school system was preparing students for jobs that existed at that time during the Industrial Revolution. Well, we continue to do that, but the Industrial Revolution is gone. So now we're in the digital age, and we're preparing students for the Industrial Revolution. So in my mind, in order to prepare students for jobs that don't exist yet, they had to have certain skills. They need to be able to collaborate. They need to be able to problem solve. They need to be able to kind of identify problems in order to problem solve. And I feel like paper pencil activities and the traditional way that we were instructing students and students were learning was not what we needed to prepare students for the digital age. So in my mind, student engagement is the beginning of changing the expectations of the adults as well as the expectations of the students. So I started in May of 2014, but in April, I had the opportunity to talk to all of the teachers in the district in a forum where they were all together at the same time. And so then I told them that our goal would be to increase student engagement. So what I was looking for is for us to move from the lecture style, particularly in the secondary classrooms, move from lecturing to projects and more interactive learning. So I was just very clear, this is our goal. This is going to be our hedgehog concept, is student engagement. It's not just science, technology, engineering, and math. Like, it's learning, like it's the process for learning everything. And with the product Defined STEM, those teachers that were used to lecturing needed something that was tangible and very concrete to start planning for project-based learning and to understand the expectations for project-based learning. But we all have the same mindset that we're preparing students for their future and not a past that no longer exists.
So I get really excited when I look backwards, especially with the last presenter when he talked about when you first starting doing something creative. In general, what I got out of that is that it's a challenge, and it is a challenge when you first start doing something creative for your environment. So this may not be creative on the West Coast or the East Coast, but for us in Kankakee, this was a creative concept to implement when most teachers felt like as long as they kept their students quiet in their seats, facing forward, focusing on the paper pencil activity, then they were successful. So then the question is, how do you balance what our community felt was really important is the academic learning through paper pencil activities and just the regurgitation of facts to preparing them for the future, which requires more than just knowing and being able to what's called the banking system and pedagogy of the oppressed, to just be able to spit out facts. Project-based learning does both. It supports academic learning, but it also promotes developing the skills that you'll need to be successful in the current economy and in the student's future. So our first goal was to integrate project-based learning experiences with the intention of helping students to identify their strengths with intrapersonal skills, their strengths with interpersonal skills, and then to incorporate all of that into academic growth. And what does that really look like? That was what we struggled with as teachers. Like, how do we implement that in the classroom? Well, with defined learning, it was just very step by step. Like the first project was very simple. They were given the recipe and all they had to do is implement the recipe. But what was creative about our product, or the product that we were using, is that as teachers grew and understand how to implement, they could make some modifications in the project within the same system. So when I look back on our mistakes, one of the things that we had to recognize is the importance of supporting our teachers in that shift from one model to another. We wanted to make sure our teachers had shared or collective efficacy, and they shared the belief and the behaviors that would support our students. We wanted our students to be self-reflective and to really understand how they're progressing in the system. And then we wanted our teachers to have a relationship with the students so that there's timely, meaningful feedback, so that the relationships that the students had with the teachers could create growth and then also equity. So students got what they needed from the teachers because teachers could identify individual student needs. What I really felt strongly about, and I still feel strongly, is that implementing project-based learning actually creates equity. And I think that because we're a diverse community, people think we have everything we need. We have diversity in terms of the economic diversity. We have diversity in terms of gender diversity. We have diversity in terms of race. We have the diversity, but we didn't necessarily have inclusion. So diversity is who's in the room, but inclusion is when you're in the room, do you have a voice in that room? I don't think that we had a really strong inclusive environment where everyone in the room had a voice. I think there was a very small, and I would actually venture to say about 20 families that really had a voice in the public school education, where other families were just having education done to them. They weren't necessarily experiencing it in a way that fulfilled their needs. Equity is when the people are in the room, they have a voice, and they get what they need to survive, to be successful, to thrive. What I also looked at when we were implementing PBL is that the goal is to raise achievement, but also give our students a sense of belonging in the environment. So that we could eliminate the gaps between the highest and lowest performers. And we really look at, what were those barriers to education, and could we put systems in place to remove those barriers, or at least mitigate them, so that students could increase the opportunities through education. I always talked about how I, as a student in Kankakee, was school dependent. My parents sent me to school and trusted the school to make sure that I was successful. And I was successful, but I was a very traditional student. I enjoyed lectures. I enjoy reading. I could sit and listen to someone for hours if their topic is interesting. What we're seeing is that many of our students are not traditional students, and they need something different. And in order to create that environment that helps that traditional student and that non-traditional student, you have to be creative in the implementation of the curriculum materials and the curriculum content. That is the reason why project-based learning is so important, because students are actually going to get not just what we have to give them, but what they need, because they'll have an opportunity to choose, how they present the information, what products they want to display, and sometimes even choose like what career they're really wanting to explore. And we had a project about 5 or 6 years ago where the project was about one thing, and out of that outcome, a student decided that they wanted to go into coding, and which the project wasn't about coding, but through that experience and the product that student chose, he knew that he wanted to go into a field that really focused on coding. So in our equity journey, our state really supports that model of figuring out equity in the schools. And so on our Illinois school report card, we actually have measures for equity. Now, those measures look at student learning, learning conditions, and elevating educators. Working with project-based learning through defined learning helps with all of those areas. Elevating educators and the skills that educators have, the licenses and the supports, their capacity in most school districts is higher than the learning conditions or the student learning. This visual that you're seeing is not Kankakee School District 111. It's another school, a high performing school. But as you can see, in most schools in Illinois, the student learning piece is relatively lower than learning conditions and elevating educators. Now, I'd have to look back at our visual, but I would say our visual would just shift it to the left. But the same would be present, that elevating educators is higher than learning conditions and higher than student learning. With project-based learning, we can provide the support to eliminate significant academic gaps, to eliminate historical inequities, and to support students pursuing a successful future post-secondary. And that is what the equity journey is about. And so here's a definition of the equity journey as indicated through the Illinois School Report Card on the Illinois State Board of Education website. And so you can see it's a fit between resources and student needs, which is where the equity piece comes in. Adequate effort to lessen the effects of structural disadvantages that disproportionately affect different student groups. What we found as we wanted to change the educational system, the people that were the most successful in the system felt like we were going in the wrong direction. What they felt many of our students who struggled needed was more of the same. But if more of a traditional system would have helped those students, they would have been successful in the first place. So our belief is that you need to redesign the educational system to make sure all students are successful. And so when I talk about the equity continuum and the journey to social justice, you look at what happened years ago was exclusion. I think now we're in the continuum where we have diversity, not necessarily inclusion, but we're working towards equity. But what we really should work towards is social justice. We should look for a system and design a system that helps students to access the resources that they need, that gives them the opportunities to be successful, and privileges are based on needs and not based on resources. We call it based on your zip code. Like, because I am in one zip code, I would say just based on the family resources that some students don't have access to. And so that is what we're trying to do here in Kankakee, is create not just equity, but social justice so that students get opportunities that they wouldn't normally have in a traditional system. So this is the last thing that I really want to reiterate is what is at risk if we don't provide a system that gives students opportunities to grow, give students an opportunity to experience learning, what would happen? Well, our economy would be affected. Inadequate public education impacts local, state, and national economy. We do have a growing minority population. Our population in Illinois is majority, in terms of public school students, is majority minority. And so that we have to recognize the difference between the needs of the students that are currently in the educational system versus the needs of students that were in the educational system 40 years ago. There is an increased division. I think that we all can recognize that that we're there. It seems like things are getting more divisive, and that there's competing voices. Like one voice thinks that their opinions and beliefs are more important than another group of people. That we need to really focus on creating equity and social justice so that everyone's voice is important for the needs that they have. And without a voice and sense of belonging, division will grow. And the other thing that I'm really concerned about, particularly in my community, is that if we don't provide all of our students what they need to be successful, and we don't support our teachers in providing those needs, that we will continue to have civil unrest, and we'll have students who don't feel a sense of belonging, which I believe that could affect us in terms of the political landscape, nationally, locally, statewide. All of this would feed into civil unrest, which is the reason why it's so important for us to focus on designing a school system that provides every student with what they need at the same time, which you can't do in a traditional system, but you can do it through project-based learning. I don't know if there's any questions. I know I have plenty of time to keep talking.
So we have some questions. If you are finished, I'm going to just bring them up. And first of all, let me just say thank you for this intentional work, deliberate and intentional work that you are doing, because as I listened to you talk about the work you were doing using defined learning around equity, right? There oftentimes, start my video, goes that, okay. Oftentimes people think of equity as just a black and white issue, when equity is an issue about every kid, whether it's a student with a disability, a second language issue, poverty, and poverty strikes white, black, Hispanic, everybody, right? Like there are people who are underserved, students who are underserved in this country. And I love that you delineated between your work around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and talked about who actually has a voice versus just being at the table, and how all that works together to create equitable outcomes. And defined learning definitely is about equitable outcomes for every student. And when you think about giving them the ability to be a part of this learning environment with project-based learning, you do not exclude any kid. Every kid is included. So I just wanted to thank you for that as an educator, and understanding that from a superintendent's view, how you have to go tell that story to ensure what everybody, like the goal, the bigger picture. Because when you talked about some people wanted to do it the same old way and it ain't worked then. So what makes you think it's going to continue to work? So here's the first question I have. Mine is a small community in the countryside. Means of transport are scarce, which makes it difficult to bring parents to school. We do motivate students to engage in projects, but families seem to ignore them. How do we get students to consider careers if they are missing the career exploration step from elementary?
So so we have the same issue, and we don't necessarily have a transportation issue. We do have a kind of knowledge gap or an opportunity gap. So when you pick a project, and ideally, and I say ideally because this has been a struggle for our teachers. So ideally, a student goes from kindergarten through 12th grade having had a minimum of 2 projects, preferably 1 project a quarter. And so the projects would lead to an opportunity to understand at least 30 different careers. And so just the experience that students have creating so for example, like the one landscape architect, that opportunity that a student has to pretend like they're a landscape architect, and then choose how they're going to demonstrate that they understand what is involved in that career, actually helps students to begin to understand careers in that field. But then it also helps students, if the teacher's a really good guide and facilitator, understand careers in marketing, or careers in being a statistician. There are a number of careers that I didn't even know existed until I was exposed to Define STEM, now Define Learning. And by just being exposed to those careers, our students are actually going online and learning more about careers in the area that they're interested in. And once they are exploring the careers in the area they're interested in, they're finding out through research and videos. And, the nice thing about having technology is that you can invite a landscape architect virtually to your classroom. Just knowing that those careers are out there was the beginning of helping our students know that there's more opportunities than the teacher, the doctor, the dentist, the police officer. There are all kinds of careers that, we had never thought of. My son wants to be, he wants to go into athletic training. But I didn't know that there are statisticians that different sports teams may employ. Well, if he's really interested in math, he should consider being a statistician in a field that's related to sports. There's all kinds of things that students can do that I wasn't even aware of, let alone our students being aware of. I don't know if that answers the question.
But I will say amen to that. I think we traditionally, especially in elementary schools, want to focus on doctor, lawyer, cop, lawyer. But there are so many opportunities. And one of the things I love about Define Learning is it gives students the opportunity to explore a variety of careers that they may have never thought of, right? But also connect that to like all the pieces. Like, what do I need? Do I need a college degree, or can I go to a training school? Like, it really lays it out in a friendly way where students are able to understand that. So I love that you talked about that. I'm going to put my battery in my laptop because I just got a notification and I don't want to get shut off. Okay, I have another question for you. That wouldn't be good. How do you begin to get school leaders out of the traditional educational system mindset? Because you talked a lot about, like, throughout your presentation about like this shift in thinking about the way we used to do it versus the way we do it now, and who we used to serve versus who we serve now. Because when we were growing up, listen, I remember when Atari came out, so I'm gonna just date myself real quick, right? Kids are just very different now. Kids walk around at the age of 2 with iPads and know how to maneuver them better than some adults. So how do you do that piece to get school leaders out of their traditional education system mindset?
I have to say I believe that that's our biggest challenge. And what I've spent a lot of time doing is really educating both the community, my board, well, I should say both. I mean, the community, the board, the teachers, all the adults on the why. And most of my adults can identify with young people in their families or in their community that have a very different mindset and experience from them. And so I try really hard to make it personal so that they can understand someone in their family is not a traditional learner. And so then what do you do about making sure that that student has opportunities when they're not a traditional in the seat, paper, pencil, rote memorization kind of a person? So I would say in the past 9 years, that has been the biggest challenge. But in the last couple of years from learning about what we need to do as leaders, is the first thing that we need to do is really cultivate the why. The second thing that we did this past was during Christmas is we had Define Learning come in and actually take our leaders through a project. Now, I will tell you that that's something that, my hindsight is 2020. That's something I wish I would have done the first couple of years, is to actually take our leaders through a project and have them pretend to be the students and go through the process of going through a project-based learning. It was an SE, it was more focused on our social emotional learning, but to go through that process so that they could have the experience. And they loved it. Now, once they loved their own experience, they were more comfortable with leading the teachers into that experience. Our next step is to have our teachers go through a project so they can experience it for themselves. But it takes time to go through the why, particularly when most teachers were successful students, not all of them, but the majority of our teachers were successful students. And many of our board members were successful students. And so to get them to understand that what made them successful may not help another student to be successful was a challenge. But first we had to make it more personal. And then second, we had to give them the experience so that they understood what our students were experiencing and how powerful that experience could be. I wish that I would have been intentional about that from the beginning. But again, I like the previous presenter said that you don't really know what you don't know until you start to be creative and kind of reflect on your knowledge. So what I would recommend anyone that wants to start from the beginning is start with your adults going through the experience and having them reflect on how important it is for students to have that experience, particularly keeping in mind their non-traditional students.
I think there's a nugget in there that you said, like, we don't know, but when people know, we need to listen to them and take their advice. And what I love is that you said you walk your teachers through it, because there's something about compliance versus engagement. And once you walk them through it, there's a different level of, I'm going to do it because the boss said to do it. But when they actually have an opportunity to immerse in the work, then they become engaged and understand how powerful it is for the students we serve. So thank you for sharing that. That's a big nugget. How do you teach a PBL strategy to students with low reading and math skills at middle and high school levels?
So my doctorate is in special education, and I love that question because one of the things that I always tell my adults, I say my adults because it's my community members, my board members, my teachers, my administrators, is that just because a student can't read at grade level does not mean that they can't think at grade level. And so if you know that you have a student that struggles with reading, there's all kinds of interventions that you can put in place so that they're getting the information and they're not depending heavily on their reading skills, including having a partner that has high reading skills. So when a student is deficit in reading or math, the traditional system actually amplifies their deficits. But when you're working in a group, then they can work on something that they're strong, an area that they're of their strength, while another student is supporting that whole project in an area that they're strong. I have to give an example. My best friend, we went to school together. We met each other in 8th grade. She is more of an opportunity experiential. She traveled all over. Her mother was a traveling nurse, so she traveled a lot. She can read a map and I can't, but I can take a test on a map and get 100%. And so what project-based learning is that I can take a test and analyze what's going on and help her to understand like what we're supposed to do theoretically, but she could actually take me on a trip to Detroit using a map and I couldn't do that. And so project-based learning is not just about your ability to demonstrate math and reading skills. It's really about your ability to learn and implement what you're doing and apply it. Sometimes students with learning disabilities can apply skills much better than the gifted and honors student. Application is actually a gap in gifted and honors classes. And so that's what project-based learning does for you. It gives you an opportunity to look at each individual student's strengths and then mitigate their weaknesses by working together.
I love that you gave that analogy because it reminded me of one of my kids who is a student with a disability, and she had an IEP. And in the family, kids are all talking, but when it came to licenses, like the kids who were in the gifted program, all this stuff, they all had to take their driver's license test like 2 or 3 times, right? So she was so nervous, but she passed on her first try. And it was such an elation to her. And I was telling her, like, your disability is not an inability. And so when you see those type of stories, but it was probably around this idea of she she loved cars, right? Like she was driving a little mini Escalade when she was 3, drifting, like she loved Fast and the Furious, right? But it was an experience provided to her where she connected. So it's so important to make sure our kids are immersed in these type of opportunities. So I love that you gave that story to talk about that difference. I have one more question for you. How do you use PBL for ELA and preparation for reading for long periods of time and standardized testing?
So I think that PBL helps with the acquisition of reading and the application, and definitely with reading comprehensions. Not necessarily basic reading skills, just the ability to read the words, but PBL helps with the application of the knowledge. So that's the reading comprehension side of it, not the basic reading skills side of it. There still needs to be time where students, what I call, build their academic stamina. For which I have to be honest with you, I know test taking is a reality for all of us, but I don't necessarily think testing actually allows students to demonstrate their skills. But I also recognize that that's how we get our funding. That's how we're measured. We're measured by testing. So separate from the project, which you have one a quarter, you're still going to focus on the activities that allow students to develop their testing skills and their academic stamina to sit for 40 minutes and take a test. So that still needs to be a part of the plan in your classroom curriculum plan, is to have your projects and have the students working in a way that they're engaging and developing their social skills, but also build their academic stamina to sit for a test, because we know the tests are also another barrier to students being able to achieve their future goals. So you're going to have both. It's not going to be or, it's going to be both.
And I love that you say that, because you got to balance. The reality is we live in a country where we got to take tests, and those tests mean something at your state and at the federal level. But balance is key. And how do you ensure balance in providing every kid with these opportunities? Listen, it was great to meet you on here. It's great to listen to the amazing work that you are doing. So thank you for sharing an hour with us today. I know in the superintendency, I know what it's like to give up an hour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody's probably waiting at your door for you right now, but we appreciate you coming and sharing your story with us, and wishing you a rest of the good week. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.